Hello, and welcome to NCSL's webinar, Cybersecurity. Would you like to play a game? My name is Jeff Ford, and I will be moderating the webinar today. I'm the Chief Technology and Security Officer in the Office of Technology Services for the Indiana Legislative Services Agency. I also serve as Chair of the National Association of Legislative Information Technology, or NAILIT, which is one of the sponsors of this webinar. The other sponsors are the Research, Editorial, Legal, and Committee Staff Association, and the NCSL Cybersecurity Task Force. One of our goals with today's webinar is to have an interactive discussion with you, our audience. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage your participation through our chat box. Feel free to type your questions and answers and any questions in the chat box, which is in the lower left side of your screen. All discussions in the chat box will be visible to everyone on the webinar. To begin building your comfort with that function and to learn who is on the line today, I invite you all to type in the state you're from and your names. At the end of the presentation, we will address some of the questions that have come in during the hour. To answer one question you may have, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on NCSL's website within the week. With that, we'll turn to our topic today, cybersecurity. State legislatures, like other government and businesses, are vulnerable to many different types of cyber attacks: politically motivated cyber attackers and hacktivists, organized attackers, disgruntled employees, or even benign computer trespassers. Members of NAILIT are very familiar with these types of threats. In fact, they name cybersecurity as the #1 priority in technology in recent NCSL surveys. Today, we are fortunate to have cybersecurity experts from 2 state legislatures who will discuss current trends, tools, and challenges. We'll also hear about why your legal team should take CERT training, and we will learn about some of the legal issues surrounding cybersecurity and CERT teams. Our first speaker today will be Michael Norris. Michael is a cybersecurity administrator for LegTech, which is part of the Washington State Legislature. Our second speaker is David Vareja. He is the Information Security Analyst for the Indiana Legislative Services Agency. And our third speaker will be Annie Chaseless, a staff attorney in the Office of Bill Drafting and Research with the Indiana Legislative Services Agency and member of their CERT team. I encourage you to take a look at their very impressive biographies, which you can find under the tab labeled Speaker at the top of your screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Mike to begin our webinar.
Good morning, everywhere, and I hope everyone's being safe today. I'm actually sequestered here in Washington, in our office building. It's actually kind of interesting. I'm actually more isolated here in our office building than I was at my house. So I came in because I didn't think you wanted to hear the cartoons or the video games my kids are playing at home. So hope everyone is being safe and protecting themselves right now. So as we're moving into incident management, it's interesting. We're already involved in an incident, one that's plaguing the nation right now, and so it's quite timely that we're talking about these things. Okay, so just real quick as we get moving forward here, a couple of things I wanted to touch on is you hear the term Computer Emergency Response Team. You might also hear Computer Incident Response Team, and you might also hear Computer Incident or Information Security Response Team. For the purpose of our talk today, those are all the same thing. If you are a practitioner in one of these areas, there are subtleties, there are differences, but what we're talking about today is pretty much the same, and just how we're approaching cybersecurity incident response. Okay, so incident response. One of my favorite quotes, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. That is by Benjamin Franklin. And I use that a lot when I'm talking about disaster recovery or incident response. Too many of our incident response plans kind of look like this. I think it's great that Dilbert actually takes this entire statement into just a quick little blurb here. But too much of our incident response plans is people running around yelling help. That's kind of what we're looking at in this state. I'm sure everywhere else with toilet paper right now. So maybe their incident response plans weren't ready to deal with the shortage of toilet paper. So everyone's running around, shelves are empty. It's kind of interesting, but right. So too many of our plans are like this, and it just causes just a lot of problems when you're trying to really focus your team and solve the problem that you're facing. The first thing when people talk to me about incident response and how we get incident response set up is my first statement is don't recreate the wheel. There are things that you have right now, processes in place that actually align to incident response. Too often we want, specifically cybersecurity professionals, we want to create something super cool. We want to create something really unique, and we create these elaborate plans. And this leads me to my next quote. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That's by the great philosopher Mike Tyson. And so balancing these two quotes, having a plan is super important, but having a plan that's been overdone or a plan that's just been kind of spun up in somebody's mind usually won't stand the test of an incident. And so really incorporating things that people are familiar with, things that people know and are comfortable with really do help when you're in an incident to create clarity and keep calm. So a couple things you probably already have in place is you may have a disaster recovery process. That's part of your incident management is disaster recovery or is a recovery phase. So start there. Grab those processes and look how you can incorporate them. If you have incident management processes, if you're an ITIL shop or if you just have a plan for when things break, grab those because those are going to be critical in actually identifying who needs to be involved in the team and what needs to be done. And then if you have communication templates, don't create new ones. Just leverage those. Use what people are comfortable with. The whole goal here is to try to make this as simple and as effective as possible. Okay, so we don't want to recreate the wheel, but there are differences between incidents dealing with cybersecurity and incidents just as your standard operation problems. The first is that your incident response needs to be contained to a select few. This is critical because if you get misinformation out there and a member stands up or says something to a member of the press that, hey, we've been breached, now all of a sudden you may be inundated with questions, comments, staff may be calling you and flooding your lines, your phone lines and your email box with questions, and it's really going to detract from your ability to respond. Evidence needs to be collected, so all your logs, all the evidence you use for the cybersecurity event needs to be collected in a controlled manner, so it can hold up in a court case. Not very few, in my experience, very few of the cybersecurity incidents I've run into have gone to court, but many have. And you want to have that evidence collected in a way that is free from tampering and is clear and concise. And then lastly, users' privacy. This is super critical. I was dealing with a security incident earlier our legislative session where a person actually got scammed, spent their own money buying cards for someone that they thought needed it. And when I went to talk to her, she was dealing with as a victim of a cybercrime. And we need to understand that people are feeling, they are a victim. Of it. Now, they could have made different decisions, maybe 20/20, hindsight, but in reality, they're dealing with all of those feelings of, not feeling good about themselves or feeling afraid, not sure about their job. All these things are flowing through their mind, and so treating the users with respect and privacy is paramount. Okay, and then making sure your process and plans tools are guarded. That's your how-to book on how to hack your organization. So you really want to keep those in a more secure environment than you would your regular plans. Okay, so just real quick, let's start talking about framework. I love this picture because this picture tells me that frameworks, you can build anything you want to in any form you want to using frameworks. And you need to create the framework that best works in your organization. We are a NIST shop, so we use the NIST recommendations. I have a link here, so you will have these slides that you can click on these and follow up on anything that you're curious about. I am not going to read everything on the slides going forward because I'll go way over my time today, but please use these as a reference for you if you have questions. First is create a policy. There's material out there to help you create those policies. Develop an IR team. Develop IR procedures, and just make sure those procedures cover every phase in the incident response processes or life cycle. Okay, so the life cycle, we use the NIST 861. This is where we started. This was a great place to start. There's a lot of material out there. Prepare. It's really a variant of Plan, Do, Check, Act, if you're familiar with that, where you prepare. That's building your policies, building your teams and your processes, making sure you have your detection tools and you can analyze information, your disaster recovery is in place. Because as you move in through this process and you detect something, you then contain, and then you analyze, and then you eradicate, and then you analyze, and then you recover, and then you analyze. Analyzing is critical as you move through this process, because you can think you're good and you've eradicated everything and you spin everything back up and the virus is still there and now everything's reinfected and now it's delayed your recovery process or your recovery time. So just making sure you're following through this process of validate and analyze, validate and analyze as you move through. And then the post-incident activity is often forgotten about, but is one of the most critical ones, simply because without this, you're not going to be able to improve your process, right? Doing a root cause analysis, updating your lessons learned is super critical. Okay, so what goes into a response team? You want a good team. You want a good, solid team. You want to look at your team model. What is going to be in scope? What is not going to be in scope for your team is super important when you're building it. What appropriate skills do you have on site? Do you have someone that's forensically trained? Do you have someone that understands how to do public information? And so having those and talking to the press. So engineers are not usually the ones you want in front of the microphone. So having someone who is skilled in those areas is really important to identify. Who's going to participate, right? Are you going to have external parties? Are you going to have other folks involved in the legislature involved? Who's going to participate in these events? And they need to be identified early on. What services are you going to provide? I talked about forensics, but also public information, talking to the press, legal services. Do you need to get a third party to come in and help involved in this, as I think we've heard and really should. But what services are those, and do you need to go to a third party? If you're going to involve a third party, there's a couple of the quick things that you need to consider is approvals. Before you talk to anybody about incident response, you really need to make sure leadership and legal is on board. This will scope your whole engagement. If you don't have your legal team on board or legal team aware of what's going on, you can get yourselves into a world of hurt. When you do work with external parties, you want to balance between the benefits and drawbacks. So the benefit is you can augment staff. The drawback is now you have to release more information out into the public that you may not be comfortable with. You also may have to bring people in and have a ramp up on that. So there's a drawback there. So you want to balance the benefits with the drawbacks. You want to coordinate before an event. So if you have a list of contacts, you need to make sure you have those down and who they are. You don't want to be searching for them in the middle of an incident. You also don't want to be talking to someone for the first time when you're during an event. And then you want to make sure those communication channels are established. And then determine how much you could share to balance between those benefits and drawbacks. And that's where your legal department will really come in and help. Okay, for our team, we set up our team here with a response manager who's really accountable for the event and manages everything from the correspondence. All communication goes through the manager, and responsibilities, priorities as far as staffing, etc. We then have a technical lead, and they lead the engagement. They are separate from all the communication. They help with prioritization, and they help with severity, but they're assigning the activities. They're following run books. They're executing. It's really critical to keep those folks separate because they need to be heads down solving the problem. Technical owners, application, network engineers, etc. Subject matter experts. I've talked about public information officers, but legal counsel, this is folks who are experts in the legislative process. And then leadership. Leadership are the ones going to be writing the checks, right? So they need to be involved in the decision-making process ahead of time so that they know, hey, we're maybe shutting down the network if this happens. Okay, run books. We use run books as a way to really help in an event. And run books are really powerful because they ensure required activities happened. And so you can have a list and just go right down through it. It's really important for faster and focused response. You're not having to recreate things. Weird things are going to happen in an event, and if you have to you make the plan and solve for those and address those weird situations, it's going to slow you down. And then really it helps with litigation and audit support. Our run books, when we were audited, we were able to provide those run books to our auditors, and instead of getting an audit issue, we actually had, that was a focus of strength in the audit report that said that we were good, we had that down. They were really impressed. So having that documented ahead of time is really helpful. This here is just an example. I'm not going to walk through this, but this is high level, right? When people start, I always recommend they start really high level and not really get down into the weeds too much on this at first. And as you go through, you can expand. IR exercises, right? Exercising is good. You want to be exercising as much as possible, and you need to exercise your incident response. The benefits of that are you need to test your IR plan. I recommend annually, if not through the course of the year, actually spread it out just so that it stays fresh in people's minds. You want to, when you run through your incident response, that gives you an opportunity to update your processes, update your run books. Is there something you left out as a technology change that you weren't aware of? You provide training. Take 10 minutes before your exercise and talk about roles and responsibilities and the standards you've created. And then it tests your effectiveness. If you believe you can pull out logs from an application and you talk to the developers or the support folks and they go, well, we can, but it's line by line, that's not going to be very effective. You may need a logging tool to be able to pull that out so that you can be quicker and more effective. And then gauge buy-in. I will take an engaged or a person who's sold out to an effort over a technical expert most days. Sometimes you just need the technical expertise, but if they're not bought in, they're not going to be engaged during the planning and preparation process. And when the event happens, they're not going to be as aware as someone who is really excited about it. And then lastly, you really want to focus on that root cause, like I talked about earlier. I use this form here. This is a lean A3 form. And the thing I love about this form is it keeps everything succinct into one page. The A3 references an A3 style sheet of paper, if you remember what those are. And it just provides all the needed activities or all the needed information. You can download these on the internet. This is one that I've used for years and has worked very well for us. So this is super critical because once you get your plans, then you can update your run books, update your policies as needed. Okay, lastly, so here's just reference information for CERT and NIST. It's a couple courses that I know are very effective and I know people have taken, and it's been useful. So definitely reach out and look to your resources that are available to you. All right, I'm over time, and I think I'm going to go ahead and pass off here to Dave. Dave, welcome to the call.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. In my household, we're looking for milk and eggs, I guess, around us. And so, but no, Mike, thanks for all the information. That's been great. I want to talk to you. I want to talk about the slide 8, the framework slide that Mike kind of brought up a little bit, and kind of elaborate a little bit more on that about the creation and development of the incident response team plan and procedures. So let's talk about this a little bit. When you have to ask yourself or your team one simple question: does it work? And if your team says, well, I think it works, the last time we did it, it worked. So then we go, okay, well, when was the last time you ran that plan? Did you ever run that plan, or do you just check a box off saying, yep, that we have that plan? Did you update your equipment? Did you have any change in personnel that you kind of forgot about? And so next thing you know, you open up this playbook, and your the information, the team that you're looking for, the phone numbers, they're not available for you because we didn't update it. And so that just takes precious time to work through, and a lot of times we don't have. And so you're going, well, I'm just setting myself up for failure if you don't do your due diligence on that. So here's an example I'd like to bring up with you guys, and most people will relate to this is that when was the last time you checked your smoke alarms in your house? Right? Do you have a fire extinguisher in your house, and where is it? My point when I bring this up is that, you know, someone planned and built your home with the idea of a smoke detection system in mind, right? But the scary question is, when was the last time you hit the button and tested your smoke alarms, or are you just blindly expecting it to work? Do you want to find out that they don't work when you're experiencing fire in your house? I sure I sure don't. So a plan is only reliable after it has been tested time and time again. Emotions, adrenaline, all these play a big factor in any unknown situation. The key word in that statement right there, though, is the word unknown. The more you test your plan, the more you'll trust your plan. That brings me to my next message to it, though. Do not skip any steps of your plan. The plan was created to be followed. In Indiana, we recently executed a tabletop exercise with a hypothetical scenario that would actually happen in our environment. I was tasked to lead this exercise. I got our team CERT team together, and we read through the scenario. Then the ideas came flooding in on how to fix the situation. The first thing we do is we didn't follow the steps. As IT professionals, we instantly think, we went to the recovery stage. How can we mitigate this? How can we stop it? How can we, fix, stop the bleeding? But we don't take into consideration, okay, what caused it, right? So take the time, run through the procedure as it's designed to. Those first steps are very critical to it, because what Mike talked about earlier is that you fix the problem, but then it comes right back because you actually didn't fix the actual cause of the problem. My next bullet point is the gaps in our plan, right? So we try, but we can't think of everything. An example, let's do another example here. Just yesterday, towards the end of our day, with 90% of our team working off-site, right, due to the COVID-19 virus, our building that houses our primary data center lost power without warning. This actually happened to us yesterday with everything going on. Our IR plan, right, was drafted with the idea that we would have staff on site. That's a pretty big gap. Luckily for us, the power came back on within 10 minutes. But what if the incident didn't resolve itself in a matter of a few minutes? What if we were breached or a disaster lasted longer? Does your plan take into consideration the driving time it takes for your staff to show up on site? Your remediation window becomes significantly smaller if that takes place. So we all have an idea of how much or how long we can take or how long we can last before we actually have to implement this plan. The last minute says, no matter what, we need this amount of time to either migrate systems over or to go into our plan itself. So what about your recovery keys information, right? Are your backups available for retrieval during non-working hours? These are all questions we need to ask. How long can your equipment run on battery backups? If you don't know these simple little bits of information, and you're trying to call people up and ask for it, you're losing time. Mike discussed on slide 12 the roles and responsibilities of the team members. A key role that can easily be overlooked when testing or executing a plan is having someone assigned to document every step taken from the start to the finish to remediate the situation. This documentation will become your procedures or your playbook for this type of incident. Why do you want to go through an event that later on you try to figure out what was that next step we did? Have somebody document it. This documentation is can become procedure, right? So test if it's a real event. The more your team tests, the comfortable they'll be when a real incident happens. We hear this all the time. It's not just, but when. When does an incident happen? So be prepared for it. Now, a lot of the stuff I've been talking about now we've been explaining just tabletop exercises. That's calling your team together and walking through some hypothetical situations. Usually all participants are notified that this exercise is going on. When you get comfortable with the exercise, you look at ways to start escalating the situation. Next time, don't inform all the participants of the drill. So start easy and then move harder. Execute the table exercise as if it's a real event. Internally, of course, right? We don't want the FBI or Homeland Security, they wouldn't be appreciating, a phone call from us talking about a tabletop exercise. See how your staff react and how easy it is for them to get a hold of. Are the phone numbers accurate? Are they answering the numbers? If it's after hours, do they have their phones on mute? And now you're trying to email them or get a hold of a spouse to get a hold of them. Make sure that they know that they have to be answering your phone calls if they are an immediate contact. Another stay-home method, right, is something that Black Hills Security came out with. So Black Hills Security created an instant response card game called Backdoors and Breaches. Right? How it works is one person is assigned a role of the incident master with everyone else playing the role of the incident handlers. The incident master then chooses some attack cards to build the incident scenario. The incident handlers use procedure cards to try and solve the incident caused by the attack cards. Cards are labeled with inject cards. So when the incident handlers roll a certain number, a 1 or a 20, I think it's a 20-sided dice, then unfortunately, then we have these attack cards, these inject cards that kind of come in and kind of stir up some chaos to it. Again, we're moving forward from an easy plan to we're escalating it and seeing how people react. So if you want to know more about this game, so I would go to blackhillsinfosec.com. I was able to, I think on that site there's also a place where you can look for the instructions on how to play. I think they do step-by-step instructions on how to play the game. I was able to purchase my deck and the dice from Amazon. Unfortunately today I looked and they're out of stock, assuming it was going to come to us anyways because they're not medical equipment. So you can even hire a company, right? There's I think some universities will even do this, and you can hire a company to play the role of facilitator. That gives them a little bit of the you give them a little bit of the information about the company, and then they'll create a custom scenario for you. This way, the whole core team can contribute instead of leaving one person out of it. If you're able to spend some money on exercises, there's a lot of large companies that are offering to take your money and do these cyber ranges. There's also there's starting to be some local ranges popping up all over the place. These sites allow you to experience a simulated real-life breach as a team. IBM even offers a mobile range. I think it was a semi-truck. This mobile range is a semi-truck that actually is that has the whole has this built-in state-of-the-art range. As long as you have the right price, you can pull right up to your shop, and you can actually take your team out there, and you can go through some scenarios. These are all team-building exercises. A local range popped up in Indianapolis just recently for us. I'd love to tell you that we experienced it, but yeah, we haven't had the money yet, and we haven't had the time to actually go through that. The other thing we have to consider is that if you have a small team, currently we can't take, in Indianapolis, we can't take our whole team off-site to do training. That's just not feasible for us. We need to have some people on site. So what are our other options, right? Our other options are these projects, right? These software, these ranges, training in a box is what they call them. This is a software solution that can be implemented in the cloud or on the prem that allows the team to do experimentations using cyber tools and techniques to train cybersecurity professionals. CyberDense, CyberBit are some of the more popular and cybersecurity simulation platforms that is deployed worldwide. I've not had the opportunity of experiencing either one of these projects. It's something that we'd love to look forward to and to do in the future. But in Indiana, we're just currently at the tabletop exercise right now and kind of moving forward with that side of it. We're very new with our team, with our core team. We've done just a few trainings for it, but again, training has been key for us. And so I know I speak a little fast. I'm a little bit under my time, but that's all I got for you guys today. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Annie, please.
Thanks, Dave. This is Annie Chase-Luss with the Legislative Services Agency in Indiana, and I do remember partaking in those tabletop exercises, and they were quite challenging. So last summer, my agency did ask me to be part of our computer incident response team to serve as legal counsel. I was definitely thrilled at the opportunity to be part of the team because I'm very interested in the area of cybersecurity, technology, and the law. However, before hitting the ground running, I knew that I needed some foundational training to equip me with the skills necessary for the position. I know that Mike and Dave mentioned certain components of the cybersecurity incident response team, and part of that, I would say, is having a legal component within your team as well. So I did turn to Jeff Ford, our Chief Technology Security Officer, for a little guidance. And because of its top-notch training and its high regard in the cybersecurity industry, Jeff recommended that I attend a training with the SANS Institute. All of our members on our team, our incident response team, have been through at least one type of training through the SANS Institute, and at least 3 of us are certified in our particular area of expertise. So the SANS Institute is one of the most trusted source for information security training, certification, and research. Many of the classes offered are taught by highly qualified, top-rated instructors who are leaders in the cybersecurity industry. So the course that I took is called The Law of Data Security and Investigations. I had an amazing, dynamic instructor by the name of Benjamin Wright. He's a practicing technology law attorney based out of Dallas, Texas. Taught a week-long comprehensive course that covered the areas of the law of crime, policy, contracts, liability, compliance, cybersecurity, and active defense, all with a focus on electronically stored and transmitted records. So after completing the course, to further my experience, I decided to be proactive and get certified in order to give my incident response team the credibility that it deserves. So I did get certified, and the certification is called the GIAC Law of Data Security and Investigations, the GLEG, I guess. So basically, this certification validated my knowledge in the area of cybersecurity and the law. So with the certification, keeps me up to date on the latest industry trends and information through required ongoing continuing education. The value of the certification will continue to grow as security issues and the law become even more interconnected. And most importantly, as I mentioned before, the certification provides added credibility to my team, which I believe is important. So now an attorney can be an important asset that is a part of your incident response team. As I mentioned before, I think legal is an important part that makes up the whole of the team. So knowing when to escalate a potential incident or breach and whom to involve is a critical part of outlining roles within the response team. So engaging a legal team early, even before calling investigators, may help the investigation be blanketed in privilege. So what do I mean by that? Well, the attorney work product doctrine provides that an opposing party may not compel disclosure of written or oral materials prepared by or for an attorney in the course of legal representation, especially in preparation for litigation. The content and results of investigation, which is usually led by an attorney, are kept confidential from legal proceedings. These legal proceedings that may follow an incident might include lawsuits as well as investigations by government authorities, such as industry regulators, state attorney generals, and potentially the FTC. So after an attorney has been assigned to lead an information security incident investigation, the attorney could request technical investigators to gather evidence, analyze it, and report back to the attorney. Usually the attorney's leadership of the investigation, such as the evidence gathering, the analysis, and the reporting, would be confidential under the attorney work product doctrine. Now, if this doctrine does apply to an investigation, the opposing party can't force the organization to reveal the results of the investigation to them. For an an organization that hopes to minimize its exposure to litigation or liability, the attorney work product doctrine can be invaluable. For example, an organization may conclude that after a thorough investigation, it did not suffer a data breach requiring it to give notice. And as a result, the organization may prefer that the content of the investigation not be provided to the opposing party, who might try to second-guess that conclusion. So basically, the response team and the attorney that's potentially working with the team should have an open discussion about how and when the team would like the attorney to be involved. And often this is going to be for confirmed material breaches that will require administrative and executive attention. It's important to understand the different types of lawyers the team will be interacting with, and when the lawyers need to be involved in defending the organization. So what can an attorney do to assist the incident response team? Well, first off, an attorney on the incident response team should be familiar with cybersecurity laws and regulations. They should be able to review all the policies, procedures, and communications related to the team. And usually the attorney has the final authority on all legal responses. So what should an attorney on a response team do prior to an incident? Generally, the attorney should have a general knowledge of cybersecurity legal frameworks. Many organizations must comply with a combination of state-mandated, industry-specific, and international cybersecurity regulations. So as Mike mentioned before, I know that his organization uses the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that's essentially what our organization in Indiana uses as well. So basically, the National Institute of Standards and Technology cybersecurity framework, the NIST framework, is increasingly becoming a de facto standard of care that companies expect their business partners to follow. Government agencies have also recognized the value of this framework and have integrated it into their operations. As I mentioned before, our organization has adopted this framework to implement strong cybersecurity protocols, procedures, and processes, which should be very helpful for us in the event of a regulatory inquiry, an audit, or potential litigation. The NIST framework also identifies and reinforces industry best practices. In fact, in the event that cybersecurity practices were ever questioned during litigation or regulatory investigation, the standard for due diligence is now the NIST cybersecurity framework. Experts have noted that many of the recommendations in the framework may be used by courts, regulators, and even consumers to hold institutions accountable for failures that could have been prevented if the framework had been fully implemented by the institution. An attorney should also review the incident response plan for compliance with legislation. The attorney should ensure that the plan provides an actual realistic standard of performance. So traditionally, lawyers, the government, IT professionals, they're usually prone to say, this will happen and that must be done. However, using words of such absolute like will and must aren't necessarily accurate for describing computer policies, processes, and efforts. So, kind of look for terms such as strive or seek when you're kind of drafting this type of language in your policies and manuals for as it relates to the law of data security and investigations to actually achieve a goal. So you can't necessarily be so absolute that you set yourself up for failure. So your plan should set an accurate, effective, and realistic standard of performance. An attorney should also assist in drafting a template for data breach notification, and the attorney should also advise the communications lead on the incident response team regarding any types of redactions that the data breach notification template should have for potential media statement, keeping in mind the protection of confidential information and the best interests of the organization. An attorney should also, prior to an incident, draft templates for information sharing agreements and ensure compliance. We have a handful of information sharing agreements that we use between our agencies and other entities. It's important for the attorney to ensure that these agreements are properly drafted and that the agency or the organization is actually in compliance with the terms. The attorney should also work with the response team to secure employees' consent for network monitoring by drafting an effective agreement. Too often employees are the ones that are, they're ground zero. They click on that malicious link because they didn't follow proper protocol or policy. So having an effective agreement within the organization is important. So prior to any incident, an attorney needs to be well prepared, well organized, to react promptly in a rapidly evolving situation. Now, what happens, in terms of what occurs during an incident? What's the attorney's responsibility in terms of being part of the team when an incident actually occurs? Well, if necessary, the attorney should complete a template for data breach notification with the communications lead and ensure that this it's released in due time and to the right individuals or organizations. At the state level, perhaps the most pervasive cybersecurity-related laws are data breach notification laws. We have 47 states and the District of Columbia that have enacted such laws, which require companies and government agencies to notify consumers, regulators, and credit bureaus about data breaches under certain circumstances. The breach notification laws found in Indiana law requires a state agency or private company to notify individuals whose personal information is reasonably believed to have been exposed to unauthorized access as a result of an electronic system security breach. So although the legislative department of Indiana state government is exempt in certain situations regarding breach notifications, there are certain situations where we're not, such as if disclosures agreed upon in a contract or or with an agreement that's made with another entity. So an attorney should also, during an incident, if necessary, as I mentioned before, assist with evidence collection. That to your advantage, hopefully the attorney work product doctrine would apply if necessary. So an attorney should also ensure that events are properly documented, keeping in mind possible lawsuits, as Mike mentioned before, and the attorney may act as a point of contact with law enforcement. So overall, an attorney on the team must show that the organization has been proactive in demonstrating its due diligence in maintaining appropriate security measures. This requires good communication and essentially having a good relationship with members on your incident response team. But, like anything in life, especially with kind of the uncertain times that's happening now, preparation is always key. So prepare, and prepare some more. That being said, I will turn it over to Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, Dave, and Annie, for your excellent presentations. We're now going to move to our question and answer period. If you've not already done so, please type your questions in the Q&A box. As we're waiting for your questions, I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the NCSL website. While we're waiting on some questions, a couple of things just came to my mind. Mike or Dave, could you chime in a little bit and talk a little bit about the difference between cyber events, incidents, and breaches? All three of those words popped up several times in everybody's presentations together, but they all have very specific meanings to them. And I think it's a little confusing for some people who are not in cybersecurity all the time to tell the differences.
Yeah, I guess I could start on that, Mike, if you want, or if you want to tackle that, I can.
Go ahead, Dave. You start first.
Well, I guess when you start off with it, the idea of an event, right? An event is just is anything from typing in a wrong password to locking your account to just normal maybe fat fingerings of keys. So some of those things they're not considered an escalation. They're just normal work issues that happen. right? Somebody gets locked out, somebody gets logged off, your power goes off on your PC. All these little small logs that kind of end up in kind of like your log server, right, are considered events. But doesn't mean that they're actual malicious events. And then from there, then you start escalating, right? Then you start, the idea of a breach, right, is something that, or let's just talk to an event. Next thing is an event, right? An event is something that is, again, happening within your environment, but has not, I would like to say, has not exited your environment. Data has not actually left the premises. It's internal, something like that happening. And then a breach, of course, is what we hear about in the news, right? Data has actually been taken off-site, and then, whether it's been encrypted or non-encrypted, it's been taken off-site. That's how I guess I would start elaborating, or I guess talking about the differences between the three. Mike, would you like to chime in a little?
Just real quick, I think it's important for everybody to know that events, we as IT people and cybersecurity people, we see thousands of events every day. There are malicious activities going on that are attacking our firewalls. A lot of things are being blocked at either the operating system level, at the firewall level. We're seeing a lot of those things happen, and most of them are benign in nature. That incident kind of goes to that next level. Sometimes these CERT teams are engaged at the incident level. We've got ransomware, we've got some type of malware that's been deployed, obviously, but it hasn't compromised data. Once we get to that breach age, that's really where I think Annie and the attorneys come in. They start evaluating whether or not an actual breach exists. Is there some type of a scenario where we have to notify the public or notify additional staff or people that something occurred, or is it just something that kind of happens in the background? Mike, do you have any other thoughts?
No, I think, just real quick, you captured that great. That's exactly what we do. We tell our teams that it is not an incident until the incident manager or the incident team lead declares it an incident. And one of the reasons for that is there are some legal ramifications. We have data sharing agreements with other executive agencies, and if we have an incident, we have to notify them in a certain time period. And so once an incident gets declared, it's now formal, and we have to notify people. So it's a real formal process that we need to make sure that people don't declare an incident before it's ready to be declared. And then absolutely, with the data breaches, the data has left the organization and potentially out there, and that's exactly, you need to bring in the attorneys and understand, is this a breach that I have to notify people on, or is this just a disclosure of internal information that means very little?
So I'll throw this one out to the panel too. We did a survey last year that showed about 50% of all the state legislatures were actually relying on their executive branches to handle some of their major IT functions, including cybersecurity. So what are your guys' thoughts around, if your executive branch handles your main IT functions, do you still need a CERT team?
So if I can jump in on that, I think absolutely you do, or at least a smaller one. Our executive branch provides it's a security operations center, it's a 24/7 center, and they provide that level of protection for us. And one of the most critical things is when you engage with a SOC, or oftentimes people use insurance and say, well, I have an insurance plan, I paid for this insurance. If you don't have a plan to how to communicate with them, or you haven't reached out to those folks, you're really putting yourself in a bad situation, because oftentimes they want information in a certain format. They need to know how to engage. If you are with the executive branch, understand that a lot of incidents spread across more than the legislature. The other elected officials may be getting hit with the same situation with ransomware. Emotet ran through a while back, and it was a virus that was financially based, and it hit everybody. And so that team may be focused on everyone. And if you don't have a relationship with them, or you don't have a plan to reply or report to the media or have legal counsel involved, you may be last on that list. So I still strongly encourage people to have a team or have a plan.
Any other thoughts on that from Annie or Dave?
No, I agree with that. I feel like the more information you can get from within, say, say, government itself. If the state is being attacked, and so in Indiana, we're on our own backbone. But it doesn't mean that we do not get attacked the exact same way, right? The same maybe ransomware might be trying to hit the executive branch, and then maybe it'll try to target the legislative branch, especially if it actually works in the executive branch. So having that communication between the two and say, hey, listen, we're seeing an uptick in phishing attempts that are coming out with this type of subject, or our firewalls are being just pinged all day long and attacked. So just to kind of get a heads up so that we can actually look at that stuff instead of being being behind is very helpful.
Yeah, and I agree with Dave and Mike. I mean, even though the executive branch may handle IT, us at LSA, I think it's important for us to have a CERT. I mean, 2 teams are better than 1. So if the executive branch may have their own team in the event that an incident occurs, we can work together as a team. So it's better for us to be able to triage a situation, internally, and work with another team to help figure out a solution.
So let's jump into a question that kind of just plays off that one a little bit. The other survey we did, or as part of the same survey that we did, we actually looked into, how many cybersecurity specialists, analysts are actually employed by the legislatures, and the number's still pretty small. So as these small teams, these small IT staffs run into these types of problems where we actually move past events, the things that happen every day, we start getting into these incidents and potential breaches. When do we start looking to external resources to help us? When do we call the FBI? When do we reach out to the state police? When do we reach out to forensic specialists or teams that can come in and help us break things down and mitigate these problems? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the most important thing, I mean, if you think there's potentially something criminal involved, like a data breach in terms of, within the system, or, if there's a potential theft that occurred within your organization's, computer supply, the attorney would be able to kind of evaluate that situation and see if, there needs to be law enforcement that has to be involved. So, I mean, the analysts are the ones that kind of are on the front lines, and they bring what they find to the attorney, and from there, the attorney can evaluate whether or not law enforcement needs to have a role in the investigation.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. I have been asked that question as well, as when do I get other people involved? And it's actually when you're planning, right? So when you're setting up your teams, when you're setting up your plans, if the FBI is going to be involved, and often they can be, specifically with the legislature. You want to contact those, your local office. You want to contact your local law enforcement early and talk to them about this and have that set up. I strongly recommend people get cybersecurity insurance, specifically if they don't have a team. That at least will help you with the requirements for that insurance, kind of get a base set of understanding what's required to offset the costs associated with incidents and data breaches. Oftentimes they're the same thing, but just for clarification. Just making sure you have insurance and you have that financial protection. It's costly.
Yeah, I know. For
the other thing
we are. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
So the other thing I would say is that, Jeff, you kind of brought it up. A lot of our teams are small size, right? And so sometimes we're just under-resourced, and we can't handle it by ourselves in a timely manner. So getting out and talking to, again, Homeland Security, FBI, if they can come in, they can help with the situation. That's always, putting pride and embarrassment aside, if we have a problem that we need to address. And so I don't see it being a problem reaching out to them when you realize that you're overwhelmed. They're there to help.
at least in Indiana, we've embraced FireEye has come into the state in general and is now providing services across the entire state from a government standpoint, all the way down to the local and election levels. We're a FireEye customer. We rely on them. They're part of our plan. If we get to a point in a breach or an incident where we need additional resources that are accessible and available to us to jump in and take a look at that, they help us with a 24/7, 365 monitoring. We rely on a partner to try to help us there to facilitate that stuff. So just kind of leading into the next question, we actually got a question from the audience here. Do external entities audit your preparedness for incidents, events, and breaches? And who performs those audits? How frequently? And generally speaking, what does the audit involve? I'll just start off right there just from Indiana. Yeah, we do a yearly audit, security audit on our system. Last year we did something a little different called a compromise assessment, which was an in-depth kind of study into the machines themselves, looking for past compromises. We wanted to be able to kind of have a clean slate as we kind of started down this FireEye path, to be able to say that our systems were clean and had not been breached in any way, shape, or form. So the compromise assessment differed slightly from a security audit, but we do those every single year. We try to rotate it between partners. Some years we will go with a large, big three out there, Ernst & Young, Crowe Horvath, those kind of people to come in and do a security assessment, penetration assessment on our systems. Those cost somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 to do. But again, they come back with a full report. They talk to us about what it is that they were able to accomplish in our system, what holes they found, how we might plug those up. On the flip side of that, sometimes we'll go with a smaller boutique company that can come in and do a little bit different type of security assessment for us. I think it's good to kind of shake it up a little bit. Some vendors can kind of get into a rut, in my opinion, and giving you the same report every single year. They look very much the same from the same reporting software. It's kind of nice to shake it up and get a little bit of a different perspective every now and then. And those audits involve everything from vulnerability scanning of the systems. They will actually try to breach external systems, try to breach internal systems, password cracking, and just basically looking across the entire infrastructure, not just computers, but switches and all the infrastructure equipment to ensure that things like default passwords aren't being set, as they came from the manufacturer. The right types of ports are locked down when they need to be. And then we will take that report back in and we evaluate that report. We look at it and say, these are critical. We need to address these issues. Some things we might look at in that and we say, yes, we know about that. So one of the ways you can get a good score off one of these security audits is they may come back and find 10 major problems. If you can go back and say, yep, but 8 of those here in my documentation is why those differ. This is why they're that way, and we have a reason. They actually don't count against you when you're in your security audit scores. So, it's kind of that fine balance. And, sometimes if you're going, well, that's a surprise, I didn't know about that, that's the worst scenario for somebody at my level, is to get a report back and have all my people look at it and go, well, that was a surprise. Because we should be running our normal vulnerability scans every single month. We should know what's going on in our system, so that we can be able to come back and say, yes, we knew about that, or we haven't got to that yet, or, we actually knew that existed. We just haven't taken care of it. So anybody else, kind of our last little follow-up, have a response to that question?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick on that. So in Washington, we're required by statute to have an audit every 3 years. We can go internal with an external, with the state auditor, or external. We've chosen to go external. If you're doing this for the first time, one of my recommendations is just kind of jump on what Jeff said, is go with one of the big 3. We went with Deloitte for our last audit, largely because there's Ernst & Young, there's Deloitte, there's KPMG, there's PricewaterhouseCoopers. There's a ton of them out there. Go with one of the bigger shops because they can be a little more flexible. So they can audit everything from your assessment, maturity assessment. They can do security testing, like Jeff was talking about. We also do a self-assessment annually ourselves, where I conduct an exercise and we go through our own security controls to see where our maturity is. And I use that for my metrics every year to show how we're doing, how we're improving year over year. What are we focused on? What are our priorities? And so just to give clarity with our security strategy. So I kind of leverage all of those for that, and they can get as in depth or as specific as you want. They are more expensive, but when you go with a bigger shop, they actually have a lot of these things already pre-canned, and can really help you build your security program. Actually, we started the security program in Washington because of an audit. We were required to do an audit of our IT for security, and they came in and found out that they weren't able to manage it the way they were. So that's how I was hired as a cybersecurity administrator, or CISO, for us to come in and build the program. So you can find a lot of value in those reports, and once you have a report, you kind of have to act on it. So it does also help drive education, and it helps drive prioritization.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike, David, Annie, and to everybody who joined us today. I can't tell you how many times over the last 3 weeks somebody's reminded me to wash my hands. Just a reminder to you guys, practice good cyber hygiene. We're seeing a major uptick in cyber events around the world. Attacks against our infrastructures are up, as well as phishing, malware, and ransomware attacks. So be vigilant. Look twice at your emails. Make sure the link you're clicking on is valid. We as cybersecurity professionals don't want to have to respond. Our users are our frontline people. They are our physical firewalls that are out there, acting in all these devices, and we want to make sure that they're protected and we don't have to respond. But again, thanks to everybody for joining us today. A reminder, this webinar will be online if you want to reach back to it, click any of the resources or links that we've mentioned. And thanks to NCSL for hosting us today.